So we will begin with introducing Jerome Palma. And Jerome is Managing Director of RF&G Life Insurance Company Limited. He is a member of the investment committees of RF&G Limited, and RF&G is part of GA Rowe and Sons Limited. He currently serves on the National Health Insurance Committee as the representative for Orinco, the organization of insurance companies out of Belize. He's an associate actuary with the Institute of Faculty of Actuaries in the United Kingdom and also the Caribbean Actuarial Association. Jerome holds a Master of Science in Actuarial Science with distinction from Heriot-Watt University in Edinburgh and has a Bachelor of Science in Mathematics from the University College of Belize, as well as a Diploma in Actuarial Techniques and Certificate in Finance and Investment from the Institute and Faculty of Actuaries. And now I would also like to introduce Stephen. So Stephen Patterson is a business administration, finance, and project management professional with 30+ years multi-sector experience at the national, regional, and international levels. Of his 30+ years, he spent 13 in the insurance industry in Guyana and the Eastern Caribbean, specifically in the areas of finance, compliance, strategic planning, and training. He is a fellow of the Association of Chartered Certified Accountants, holds a Master of Business Administration from Oxford Brookes University, and is certified to facilitate programs of Leadership Management International, LMI, an international organization dedicated to the development of leaders and organizations to their full potential. He is the founder and principal consultant of SAP and Associates, a business and financial management consultancy, and is also an official licensee of the Leadership Management International franchise in Guyana. Stephen is an ardent sports fan, loves the outdoors, and enjoys reading and meeting people. And now I would also like to introduce Simone, and everyone who is familiar with CCGI also knows Simone really, really well. She has been a long-standing member here with us at CCGI. Simone is also an attorney at law, a certified mediator, businesswoman, wife, and mom. Her early career began in the University of the West Indies, where she worked as a research assistant, tutor, and most recently, a lecturer. She opened her own boutique legal practice, Phoenix Legal and Consultant Services, as well as a liqueur and cocktail company. And Simone, I'm not going to try and pronounce the name of that company. We'll ask you to share a bit on it later. So you'll tell us how to pronounce it. She is a firm believer in lifelong learning, and all of us who know her at CCGI know that this is absolutely true. And she has recently embarked on her doctoral studies in interdisciplinary gender studies at the Institute of Gender and Development Studies at the University of the West Indies in St. Augustine. Her primary area of research being workplace violence and women. Simone enjoys volunteerism and is actively involved in a number of civil society organizations, including the Scouts Association of Trinidad and Tobago, the Association of Female Executives of Trinidad and Tobago, where she will soon assume the role of president. In fact, today, she assumes that role of president. And as I stated earlier, she's also a member here at CCGI. In her spare time, wherever she finds it, because she's so extremely busy, she enjoys exercising, reading, and spending time with her family. And now it is my absolute pleasure to introduce our moderator for today. Carmel, thank you so much. I know that it was quite a rush trying to organize everything and join us, but we so appreciate you being able to come here and be part of this panel with us this morning. Carmel Haynes is the Executive Director of the Barbados International Business Association, BIBA. She is also a board director here with us at the Caribbean Corporate Governance Institute, a member of the Florida Society of Association Executives, a member of the Business Advisory Group of the United Nations Global Compact's Caribbean Network. As the executive director of BIBA, Carmel sits on the board of directors of the Barbados Private Sector Association and by extension sits on the full social partnership, a tripartite participatory governance body made up of representatives of labor, the private sector, and government, which is chaired by the Prime Minister of Barbados. Carmel is also currently a member of the transition team overseeing the creation of Business Barbados, a new statutory corporation designed to revolutionize government's business facilitations efforts. Carmel, I'm so happy, as I said, to have you come and join us and to take over this session as moderator of this morning's panel with the topic, The Pursuit of Purpose in SMEs.
Sorry. Thank you so much, Kamala. And I want to apologize again to you and the panelists for the delay that I had in being able to join. Unfortunately, you know, Murphy's Law, what will go wrong, what can go wrong will go wrong. And so, unfortunately, I just could not get my camera to work. So thank you so much for going ahead, introducing our panel today to the audience. And so as I now assume duties, I would first like to invite our first panelist, Ms. Simone Francois Whittier, to offer her thoughts on this particular subject. Simone?
Thank you so much, Carmel. I see our glasses are matching today too.
Yeah.
But I can't use I can't use progressive, so I have to take it off.
Oh.
So for me, when I looked at the topic, I said, the pursuit of purpose, and I was forced to do some introspection, being a small business owner myself. No, not ever having been before. And I need to state that. And for a lot of our small, well, SMEs, I would say, we often are asked, well, why do you have a business? Why did you leave your job? Or why do you have this side hustle? And I hate the term side hustle because for anybody that has a family-owned or small business, you know it's not a side hustle, it's a labor of love. It takes up a lot of your time. It takes on a life of its own. Yes? So if you have 2 kids, now you have 3. Yes? And for me, when I looked at it, I said, first, the attorney me said, well, let's define the term. What's purpose, right? So just to share, in case nobody knows, according to the Britannica dictionary, purpose is the reason why something is done or used. It's the feeling of being determined to do or achieve something. And I found that was simple and poignant enough. For me, as an SME owner, as someone involved in it, I had to ask myself, well, what purpose is? And then why? But 2 whys. Why do you need to know what purpose is? And then what is your purpose? And then how you're going to pursue that purpose. So I will just walk you through what I did. I had to identify my values. I heard someone say earlier, they spoke about the value system, the earlier speaker. Knowing that value system is so important because that determines the kind of business you go into and how you do business. Yes? In Trinidad, we have a saying, they're tricky daddians. I'm sure all of the Caribbean is familiar with that term. And business is no different. Because you have to decide if you're going to be guided by certain principles, if your pursuit of purpose, if your business is going to be on the up and up. Are you going to use or adhere to governance principles, ethics? And we spoke about that before with Professor. So those are some of the things that I considered. I also looked at how I engage because I often think about my pursuit of purpose in 3 terms: passion, profit, and permanence. And permanence in terms of legacy. What am I leaving behind? Is this a business that I've started that I can leave for my children's children? And how does this business impact my community and the environment? So whilst I did not set out looking at ESG, because when I started 5 years ago for the liquor, and the name of the company is In the Line TT, very simple, In the Line. Trainees are always in the line. I did not think of it in terms of ESG. I didn't know what that was. But being part of the Governance Institute, I became very familiar with the term, and then I recognized there were certain guiding principles that led me to that determination. So I look at it in terms of passion, not in terms of, follow your passion and oh my God, everything will fall into place. But no, being so determined, according to Britannica, so set on that purpose. The Bible says to set your face. You have to make up your mind, this is what I want to do, but you have to have that clarity of thought, that purpose, that objective. Once you do that, of course, it's for profit, then why are you in business? You have to keep on your lights. To be able to buy the raw materials, to be able to serve people, you have to be very clear what that purpose is. Am I here to make art? If I make bags, is it that I want to sell bags, or is it that I want to make art and show people? Because sometimes you hear people who are artsy and very crafty, like, you know, they say, I can't do the business and, you know, I just want to create art. But even though that there's passion, you have to be realistic. There's a profit side of things. And lastly, for me, permanence and that legacy. Because anything you do, it has a ripple effect. Even if you are not cognizant of it, whatever you do, there's a ripple effect. And as an attorney, and especially in the field I'm in, there's a lot of regulatory requirements that I had to become very quickly familiar with. And that's part of my legacy, setting it up in a way that not only my business, but other small businesses that I'm in contact with, people I deal with, friends, relatives, you know, colleagues, associates, I could guide them and say, you know what, if you're in this business, you know, there's certain laws, there's certain legalities, there's certain things that you have to become aware of. There's certain governance considerations in your board, you know, is this a sole trader? You know, just to be able to guide them and set up something that is bigger than myself. And not necessarily at any cost to anybody else, but just be able to give people the information so that they then could set up something that lasts. So it's not something. So for me, just knowing what purposes, why you're doing it, and then for me, how I pursue it in terms of those three pieces of myself: passion, profit, and permanence. So I'm handing over to you, Carmel. Thanks.
And thank you to Simone, and very interesting introducing your version of the 3 Ps. I'm sure we will get more into that a little later. But for now, I'm going to hand over to Jerome Palma and ask him to make his 8 to 10 minute contribution on the topic area.
Still morning in Belize. So morning, everyone. Thank you, Carmel. Carmel, for that good introduction, nice introduction. You know, I think Simone already laid the framework in terms of purpose and looking at definition of purpose, the why, the reason behind. And I think that's the driving force then of understanding the pursuit of it then with respect to SMEs. You know, when I was looking at it, I gave some thought to a conversation I actually had yesterday, looking at sporting teams and local teams, the aspect of local teams competing. You know, that is really SMEs. We're a local team trying to compete with other teams, but it builds capacity, it builds individuals, it develops community. That's really what SMEs do. That at the root of it is the why. You know, it meets a need. And if you're thinking, and I use the analogy of a sport team, you're thinking, how do you meet the needs of the community? You build the capacity of individuals to play on the team. You build the support around the team for people to go and watch the games. You build healthy competition within the rules and the framework, and you play it in that way. You know, that's a lot of what SMEs do. That drives the purpose. In doing that, we also see where SMEs contribute to supply chain, contribute to development in that area. Large companies, multinationals, may not be willing to come into a local community, a small country like ours, right here in Belize, Trinidad, in the Caribbean. SMEs now allow that avenue. It allows that pathway where we can get the Apple product and the Samsung product and everything else without them being operating here. You know, I see that as a need being met. That's the pursuit now. That's you deliver on those. That's what a lot of SMEs do. And it also goes the other way, where we bring in products, we bring in supplies. We see the services, you know, as a local life insurer, we can bring in a product that can meet an international need for our local citizens. But it goes the other way. By that, I mean, moving out, creating a market outside. We look at it for small farmers then, small agricultural producers then. We look at it in the hotel industry. It creates an avenue for us to distribute our services outside of Belize, for us to distribute our product, for us to build our local capacity. So at the root of it, you know, when I looked at it and I thought, okay, the purpose of SMEs, it comes back now initially at community development. How do we develop community? It has got to be meeting a particular need, you know, and that need may come down to individuals with an entrepreneurial spirit, saying I have a particular product in this community because we have vast resource in this particular area. I give you a local community here. down south in Hopkins where there's a lot of mangoes. There's so much industry that can be done and produced just from that. You develop the community, you develop resources right within. Those are the root purposes of SMEs. You develop those resources, then what happens? You develop people, you develop economic opportunity, you develop skill set. People who traditionally looked at, and I'll use it as basic as I can, as mangoes and say, oh, you know, it was just a fruit to eat. Now they recognize how to produce jam for it, how to make it more sustainable and non-perishable for an extended period of time. You know, so you develop a different skill set right within the people in there. You develop the economy, you create jobs, you create movement. You allow people now to stay where they're at because there's an opportunity to develop. I look at it, we are where I'm at R&G Life Insurance. We're a local life insurer. We're head office here. We're situated here at SME, right? It has allowed people to develop technical skills that they may not have been able to develop here locally. If not for the SME being willing to be structured here, set up here. Technical skills, technical understanding allow me in my profession as an actuary to come back home in Belize and to apply a lot of what I know to a local company, a local entity, to be able to build that up. So when I look at SMEs, I looked at the topic, the pursuit of purpose in SMEs. I think it's meeting a need. What is that need? A lot of the times it come back to a specific need, maybe in an area, but meeting a need for community development. And you develop people, you develop the resources, you impact the supply chain, you impact what can be received in and what you can send out. So you impact distribution going out. You do all of that, we start to see where SMEs become significant employers, where we become significant coordinators, where we can influence decision on a national level. Co-ops come out because of these type of things. And, you know, that drives the need. So again, I'll come back and say at the root of it, meeting that need, understanding that need, that drive is about community development. When I look at it, purpose of SMEs, that's really what I looked at the core of the pursuit now of purpose, community development. Small entities then being able to impact positively in aggregate communities then, and also individual capacity and skill sets where people can stay, develop, and grow within communities then. I'll leave there. I'll turn back over to Carmel.
Okay, thank you so much, Jerome, for your sporting analogy. That was very interesting. And so now I am going to invite Stephen to offer his thoughts for the next 8 to 10 minutes on this particular topic area.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you. And I must say thanks to Kamla for allowing me the opportunity to be on the panel today. I met Kamla sometime last year at a conference in Ghana, and we built a wonderful relationship, and this is what it has turned into so far. It's building as we go along. I must say that I'm very delighted to be part of the program from Sunday. In fact, Sunday, it was an extremely wonderful launch event. And even coming to this morning, I think the presentation done by Ailey this morning was wonderful. And there were a lot of insights there coming from her with respect to SMEs and purpose and so on. I'll bring it together a bit later on. But I'll start by talking about purpose with respect to, well, let me go back to last November, 2023. The World Business Forum, they usually have a conference every year. So the theme for last year's conference, so one word was the theme, purpose. And, you know, you can imagine bringing together thought leaders over a 2-day period talking about purpose. What is remarkable about that whole exercise and discussion of purpose by thought leaders over 2 days is that it has been recognized. Purpose has been recognized as being important enough to warrant a 2-day discussion by leading minds around the world. So, you know, it is very important that we pay careful attention to the purpose, what purpose is about, the application of purpose, and then bringing it down to SMEs as we will do here. What I'll do quickly is just to give a brief background of purpose, starting pre-19th century, looking at being profit-driven. It was a profit motive from the very inception. Then we come to the Industrial Revolution, where it still remained profit driven, but it was all based on industry, and then it evolved later on into having people involved now, because as you begin to expand, as you begin to scale, people get involved, management theories get involved. So you start looking at focusing at things like productivity. Then coming down to the 20th century, you started looking at, well, that's a scientific management. And then towards the mid 20th century, you start hearing about discussions on corporate social responsibility. So you're seeing the evolutionary process of this purpose coming later on in the 20th century. We're talking about in the 80s, you're talking about having stakeholder theory, where they're looking at not just shareholders, but employees and customers. And, so you have all this building up. And then later on in the 90s, you had, well, we are now familiar, and I call it we, when I talk about Professor John Elkington, the triple bottom line. I say we because I'm now holding myself as part of this discussion with the CCGI. And then we move on to the 21st century, where we're now talking about purpose-driven businesses. And so you find the evolution of purpose, starting from profit orientation all the way now to where you start talking about purpose-driven businesses. Then, of course, we're talking about sustainable development goals, and then now what is currently topical, ESG, environmental, social governance, and how that impacts businesses. Our current trends as it is now, we talk about integration of technology and purpose. We talk about the impact of millennials and Gen Z, the influence they have. You know how those are very social activism and how they can impact the business. They choose businesses, they choose where to work, they choose what to buy based on their own views of how you impact the environment, how you produce what you produce, what sort of labor you use. And then, of course, we're still perhaps now coming out of the pandemic, and that in itself had a lot of impact on how businesses operate. And you find that some businesses would have emerged paying attention to their employees, paying a lot more attention to the employee, the well-being of their employee. That in itself is purpose emerging there. So that whole movement, that whole evolution, I'll just conclude it by saying the concept of purpose in business has evolved from a narrow focus on profit maximization to a broader, more inclusive approach that considers social, environmental, and governance factors. This evolution reflects changing societal values, increased awareness of global challenges, and the recognition that businesses can and should play a pivotal role in creating a better world. So, excuse me, that's our brief history, as it were. Now, where does the SME fit into all of this discussion on purpose and the pursuit of purpose by SMEs? And I would posit that it involves the intentional alignment of business operations, culture, and strategies with a broader social, environmental, or ethical mission. The first speaker spoke about the definition of purpose, so I wouldn't go into the definition of purpose, but I think it's very important that you clearly define what your purpose is, what your purpose will be. And then you move on to embedding such purpose in your business strategy. What do you do to embed those? You look at things like your purpose-driven leadership. Earlier, Ailey talked about leadership at the bank, and she traced the history of leadership going back 4 generations of one family and how that emerged over time. And the fact that it's now the last in that 4 generations who is now retiring and handing over the reins. So you see the movement of that purpose-driven leadership. You talk about operational assignment, and one speaker mentioned supply chain, how you manage your supply chains, how you develop your product. I mentioned that a bit earlier. we see so many conflicts and hear discussions about the use of child labor. We hear about blood diamonds. We hear about even to this day, you hear about slavery, and I'll share a case study on that slavery business in a short while. And then, of course, there's the element of culture. How do you introduce, or where does purpose fit with culture? Bringing in a purpose-driven culture, how does that impact the employee? Well, in terms of employee engagement, you're looking at the values that you engage people for. What value do they bring? Are the values consistent with that of your organization? And then, of course, you spend time training and developing them, bringing them along with those values. And then, of course, measurement and communication. Always important that whatever we do, we have some measurement metric in place, and there's clear communication lines with respect to how you're developing this purpose-driven business. And then, of course, transparency when it comes to things like reporting. And I think one of the important things in this whole business of purpose is storytelling. You have to be able to tell stories, have to be able to share stories, have to be able to communicate those clearly across all lines, so that, as we use the word buy-in, not quite a favorite of mine, but you have people coming in on board because of the stories that you share with them, and they can relate to, they can identify, and they link with you in developing your purpose, in developing your businesses. Earlier, one of the guys mentioned community involvement, and I'll even go back to Eileen comments earlier this morning when she talked about the bank, when she talked about Scotia being profit driven and the family thinking in their thought they were more focused on the community that they operated in more than the profit. But of course, they brought it all together. So that is where purpose comes in. And SMEs and family businesses, you know, they originate from the values of those family members. They bring family values to their business and they develop it over time, and they harness it over time. So we see the effects of that as we bring it all together. Of course, these things do not come easily. There are lots of challenges that you have to overcome. You have to deal with those challenges, meet them head on. First of them, and perhaps resource limitation. As an SME, as a small business, you're always struggling with resources, unless you're blessed to come from a background of wealth. And even then, it doesn't mean that you're going to be throwing your resources around willy-nilly. I mean, it comes to managing it properly, harnessing it properly, and putting it where it ought to be or where you think it ought to be, so that it can develop and grow. And then, of course, you have to balance profit and purpose, which is coming back to the triple bottom line. There again, you see the effects of it. I think it's very important that as a business, you manage that. I mean, if you're going to build a purpose-driven business, you must have that profit motive. Always have that at the back of your mind. Right. So I'll wrap it up by looking at two practical examples of purpose, and in some cases overcoming the challenges. And the short one, CVS. Many of us know of CVS Pharmacy. CVS Pharmacy in the US. From time to time, they'll be meeting with health officials, you know, for various reasons, including the closing of deals and so on. And every time they met with the doctors, there was always that uncomfortable situation where the doctors will say, okay, so you have as your purpose the taking care of your customers and the health of your customers and so on, but yet you sell cigarettes. And of course, they recognize it as a problem. And they took a deliberate decision to take cigarettes off the market, remove all cigarettes from all their shelves. And that's what they did. Of course, the impact of that, I mean, you can imagine the loss of sales, the loss of revenue. Their share price took a hit. But over time, what eventually happened, you find that where they were operating, where they had scale of operations, let's say they operate in the community, you may have a number of them operating, you find the incidence of cigarette smoking going down. Eventually what happened, people begin to recognize that CVS is serious about what they're doing, and sales in other areas was able to pick up and bring those things back, bring up back revenue. And of course, share price went back. So you do have people, you do have customers paying attention to you for your values, and they will be willing to work with you and support your values. You'll find that happening. And eventually in time, it's going to return. I'll just go through a quick case study I came across. A chocolate company out of Holland. It's called Tony's Chocolonely. And Tony's challenge is that Tony seeks to create awareness about child slavery and exploitation in the cocoa industry and to lead by example. And the challenge he had to overcome, initial struggles. As a small company, Tony's Chocolate faced significant resource constraints. Producing ethical chocolate involves higher costs due to their fair trade practices and ensuring supply chain transparency. Their solution, they leverage storytelling, there's that storytelling again, and transparency to build loyal customer base. By sharing the story of this mission and the realities of the cocoa industry, Tony's was able to justify its higher prices and attract consumers willing to pay a premium for ethical products. Balancing profit and purpose. What's the challenge here? Ensuring financial viability while adhering to strict ethical standards can be tough, especially in a competitive market like chocolate. The solution, Tony's adopted a unique approach to creating a distinct and engaging brand. Their eye-catching packaging and engaging marketing campaigns highlighted their mission, which helped differentiate them from competitors. Additionally, Tony's focused on scaling their operations sustainably, reinvesting profits to expand their impact. Supply chain challenges, ensuring a slave-free supply chain in an industry notorious for exploitation is incredibly complex. And their solution, to develop a direct trade approach, sourcing cocoa beans directly from cooperatives in Ghana and the Ivory Coast. They pay a higher price than the fair trade premium to ensure farmers earn a living income. They also invest in long-term relationships and support initiatives that improve farming practices and community well-being. Outcomes and impact. Market success. Tony's has grown from a small startup to one of the leading chocolate brands in the Netherlands and has expanded internationally. Their revenue and market share have steadily increased, demonstrating that a purpose-driven approach can be financially successful. Industry influence. Tony's has raised significant awareness about child slavery and exploitation in the cocoa industry. They have influenced other companies to adopt more ethical practices and have engaged in lobbying efforts for industry-wide change. Social impact. By paying fair prices and investing in farming communities, Tony's has improved the livelihoods of cocoa farmers and their families. Their efforts contribute to creating a more sustainable and equitable cocoa industry. So that's a case study on Tony's and their how they utilize their how they utilize their purpose and developed it and applying it into their business. You know, it is very topical. Well, if you go to most websites, most companies, they do have purpose. They're always, you know, talking about their purpose. One of the challenges they all face, all of us as companies, as small business enterprise, is how do we, or do our decisions, are the decisions that we're making consistent with our purpose? And I think that's where the challenge comes. I think once you can reconcile those two, then you're well on the way to establishing a purpose-driven enterprise. Thank you.
Thank you too, Stephen. And so with that being said, we are now going to get into the discussion part of the panel discussion. Also letting our audience know that you can feel free to engage with the panelists as well by raising your hand. But first, let me just throw this back to Simone. So we would have heard, in Professor Elkington's presentation on Sunday when he spoke about the evolution of his 3 Ps of sustainability, and he looked at planet, people, and profit. As we noted earlier, Simone, you too have come up with 3 Ps, which you kind of use to guide your purpose, which are passion, profit, and permanence. And so what I wanted to hear a little bit more from you is, how do you see these linked to sustainability as well? Not just environmental, but as Professor Elkington would have discussed as well, the fact of you need to have sustainable businesses in order to sustain communities, etc. So if you could chat a little bit more about your 3 Ps.
Thank you. So I had a list, I had prepared notes, but you said no PowerPoints. So, but seriously, it's a great question. And thanks so much for that, because I often ask myself that when I say permanence too, to me, it's not just permanent in one way, it's about adaptability and evolution. So you may have started it out in one way, but it may not end the way you started. Yeah. And what feeds into that too is that core values. But I noted something one of my fellow panelists said. Personal values, ethics, data and resources are things that I noted. All of those things feed into that sustainability. So then you change your strategy to suit the situation. You can't sell something that nobody wants to buy. And that's something that a lot of SMEs don't necessarily understand. You have to be constantly touching base with your market. Know who your customers are. I had written on UVP. They told us when I did my business course, what is your unique value proposition? You have to know what you're coming, what makes you special? Why are you selling? How do you compete? But also, who is your ideal client? Because when you identify a client, then you could find out what their pain points are, what they need. And once you identify what they need, then you could try to serve them. All, of course, being aligned with what your values are, what your ethical considerations are, if you have ethics at all, because, that's another conversation altogether. But it's something for me in terms of that permanence. I look at it in terms of having a consistent presence, like you say, not just environmentally, but in terms of that longevity of the business in some way, shape, or form. You could have started off like we do in drinks. I started to do iced teas. I may decide to move the company into a totally different direction. I could start looking at sustainability in terms of, okay, maybe you want to sell teas. Maybe you want to move out of alcohol. And that would then mean looking at, ethically sourced tea. And that may be something else that may be aligned with my core values as a person. And if I may, I don't want to take away your job, but there's something Stephen said, and Stephen, I liked what you said. You spoke about the values impacting the people, like, so the family, and we had the first speaker speak about that in terms of the family values and impacting different permutations or later permutations of the company over a course of decades. So the core values of that family would have then been translated to new people. But my question is, in terms of, again, that whole permanence and that legacy and that strategizing and that sort of sustainability, how do you ensure that your values stay with the company? And that whoever you hand over the reins to, can you even ensure that they don't just take it and go all crazy and decide, look, we're doing anything? How do we make sure as SMEs with limited resources and sometimes limited personnel, because one person in the family may be the only person that has a vision, how do we make sure that that value system continues and the company is sustained going forward? I hope I addressed your question.
Thanks, Simone. Yes, you did. As I said, I was really interested in your holistic view of sustainability, not just from an environmental perspective. And so values is something that you've brought up, Stephen has brought up. And so it's something, that I think is integral to each of your presentations. And since you kind of threw that question out there, but in the context of something that Stephen said, I will turn over to Stephen and ask him what his thoughts are on that last question that Simone raised about how do you integrate values so that they're there for the long haul as families pass from generation to generation. How do you try to ensure that those core values are adhered to for an SME particularly?
Right. Actually, I was planning on having a word on that as well. So thanks for allowing me to say something about it. Values, especially family values, those are cultivated over generations and handed down from generation to generation. Where there's a departure, that is a major setback in some instances, and in some instances, it can be done for the better. I think in terms of sustainability of the value, and to ensure, Simone asked about ensuring that the value is perpetuated. I think it comes back to having what I would describe as an infinite mindset. If you can develop that infinite mindset, meaning, Simone, you yourself spoke about it actually, because I made a note of it. I made a mental note of it when you talk about what the legacy you want to leave and what you want to hand down to your children. Somebody once asked Richard Branson about his legacy and how would he want to be viewed, but at what he accomplished at Virgin, and his response was a simple response: "Don't judge me by what I accomplished at Virgin. Judge me by what my children do." That is an infinite mindset. That is what's going to take you, whatever you envision, whatever you cultivate, into the future. And I think it's important. I mean, I did mention hiring, engaging employees, engaging staff. You engage. I mean, it's not just about. I mean, it's nice to say we share values, but it's important that you have some system in place that vet the values of the people that come on board, that you bring on board. You ensure that you share and they share your values, or at least your values are consistent, so that it can be perpetuated. I hope that helps.
Yes, it did. Thank you very much. And so I'm going to flip back to Jerome now. And one of the areas that, your whole analogy about a small business being like a sporting entity, a sporting team, and you spoke about, how it's meant to meet the needs, build community, build capacity, and build support from stakeholders. And this kind of links back to something that Simone had also mentioned regarding small businesses not necessarily doing enough market research to understand that they're not selling the product or service that they want to sell or they want to create. They're really selling a product or service that meets the needs of their community. So if you can touch a little bit more about that around the whole sustainability discussion as well, that would be helpful, Jerome.
Yeah, thank you, Carmel. I think that what both Simone and Stephen touched on in terms of purpose-driven is key. And how do you build in that legacy? How do you allow it to continue in order to meet the need and ensuring it? I think that it has to start with documenting it, being clear as to what exactly it may be that the purpose was initially thought of, what the values are. In this era where we have websites that you can easily place it there, it's accessible. People can read it. You can come in and see it. So I think it has to be documented. It has to be laid out. It has to be shown the history as well. You don't want it to be lost. We relied so much over generations on the history being passed down through sitting through campfires, over dinner, to business meetings. We have to step back sometimes, I did in leading SMEs to document it in a way that the next generation be onboarded and understand what was the need that was identified at that time, what was the purpose of setting us up the SME, the journey, because it would not have been a straight path. There were many bumps and curves and things along the way, and then where we started, the journey, where we are, and even looking ahead, what we would like to see in the future, see for the entity. You become more purpose-driven when you have it documented, you have it laid out, you can articulate it as a part of like where I'm at, just onboarding, just sharing that history, sharing with new team members. You get a buy-in and an appreciation for what was the initial light, the spark that moved it forward and allow the development of the SME, the family-owned business, that allow it to move forward. What was that initial light? What was that initial need that was identified? And it could be something very basic. I came in, I had experience over there. I saw that I could have applied this experience to this local market. Let me see how I can do it. And because we have a lot of people who went abroad, they develop contacts, networks, they could come back locally, tap into those contacts who may not necessarily want to come to the local small market, but are willing to share their expertise, willing to share information, willing to provide contacts so that the SMEs can survive and bring services and products to local entities to continue to build community. So I think as a part of building a legacy, documentation to me becomes key, laying it out, articulating it. The onboarding and recruiting process of bringing people on board that fit the profile. I mean, when you're bringing on board, you can never be certain, but that fit the profile, that fit the bill, you know, and then sharing that story. So it becomes a shared vision that moves from one generation to the next.
Thanks, Jerome. Documentation, I agree. I mean, that's where mission statements and vision statements come in. And then once you have those, even small businesses, you know, having those at their core so that new directors, whether executive or non-executive, can have something that will guide them, something written and something that they put out in the public. I think it's a very good idea. One of the terms that you used just now in your discussion was evolution. And we saw in Stephen's outline of the evolution of the whole idea of purpose and business purpose, moving from being profit-driven to coming down the line to now being more, I would say, community, social driven, etc. I mean, we don't see that in all areas, but more and more businesses are really focusing more on that as they understand that you need people in order to be able to continue buying your products, etc. So try to conduct yourself in the most sustainable way, not only for the business, but the community around you. So Stephen, coming back to those points that you were making, could you speak a little bit more about how you see the transition from being shareholder focused to stakeholder focused, how that also ties in to the idea of being purpose driven in business?
All right, just before I go there, I just wanted to add a bit more to what Jerome just talked about, and even you yourself mentioned with respect to documentation. I think it is very, very critical for SMEs, especially SMEs, because, you know, as an SME, you know, it starts out, it may even started as being one person, and you become the jack of all trades. You do everything, and then there's no time. Your working time is from when you wake up to when you sleep. You don't have time for anything else. But it's very, very critical that you document things. I have a client, I'll just share an experience with you. I have a client, and whenever I go to visit that client, I would stop on the highway and I'll just look at what they're doing. And I did at one time say to him, listen, guy, you need to start writing this thing down. And his comment was, look, I know what's happening. And I'm like, no, this is not for you. So I was saying to him, you need to document. And I think this is very, very important for any SME. Document, have the history created. Let people understand, let people see your journey.
I am not sure.
Yes.
I'm not sure what's happening there with Stephen's connection. Unfortunately, he keeps...
Yeah, no, he's on his phone because he too had some problems with his laptop. But Stephen, okay, what you were sharing was really so important. So we would like you to try again and telling that client of yours the importance of documenting what he's doing. What was his response?
Right. Well, his initial response was that, yeah, I know, like, I know about it, so there's no need for that. And like I was saying, I understand, you know, I did say to him, it's not about him anymore. It's not about him anymore. It's for the staff who's there. It's for the people who come in and visit. Because it has gone to a stage now where people come and they are in awe about what they're seeing, because those who go there regularly know from the humble beginnings of what that project was to where it was today. Even in the last 24 months, it's just a complete transition from where it was to what it is now. And I think it's very important that you document everything you document the progress, you document the history so that people get an appreciation of where it just didn't happen like that. You know, it took time and effort and energy and blood, sweat, and tears. So very, very important that you document the journey. All right, now I've gone on so much with that, I completely forgot. I lost track of that question that was directed at me. Sorry about that.
Yes, that's fine. No, I mean, it was obviously an important point as well. Institutional knowledge, especially if you want permanence, if you want legacy, you have to have that institutional knowledge that you can pass on. And the best way to do that is capturing through documentation. The other question I had asked you about was the sort of transition that you had traced from being shareholder profit-driven focus to now we're seeing companies being more stakeholder focused, and how that relates to purpose. But before you answer that, I just want to remind our viewers or our audience that they can raise their hand or they can drop a question in the chat if they don't necessarily want to voice it directly, and I can obviously voice it to the panel if you have any questions. Thanks. So, Stephen.
All right. So you're right. So stakeholder and the transitioning from shareholder to stakeholder. I'll answer it like this. There's one writer, one thinker, one thought leader who talks about where you have this, shareholder empowerment, shareholder values, shareholder, and everything you do addresses the needs of the shareholder. His analogy was this: it's like having a sports team, and you're planning for this sports team, and you're developing the sports team based on the needs of the fans. You're not even considering what's happening with the team. You're satisfying the fans. And I think that is where the transition has come. We've moved away from that. The current thinking, the current thought is you begin to look inward. You begin to pay attention to employees. You begin to pay attention to customers. You begin to pay attention to the people providing you with finance. And even that one, especially in this modern time, especially in now the time of ESGs, you have your stakeholder, the one who provides the funding, the shareholder. You should ensure that they are aligned with you and not just looking for a profit motive. Because if they're looking for profit motive and your focus is maybe something more social, then chances are you're going to have major conflict. And if you take their money, you can't argue if they're going to demand from you returns, because that's what it's all about. But I think the thinking has to be a whole lot different. Your mindset has to be a whole lot different once you begin to address issues of purpose and having a purpose-driven entity. I hope that helps with addressing the question.
Thanks, Stephen. I do see that Simone herself has her hand up. Simone, did you want to also add a comment here?
Yes, please. And that's cool. It's something that I was thinking about as I was listening to my friend speak here. And it's something that I always think about. As an attorney, I'm always mindful of the legislative requirements. See, and that need for documentation, that's a legislative requirement. Now, one that unfortunately a lot of SMEs don't quite understand. So you find that refusal or reluctance or resistance to documenting even their processes, their trade secrets, for instance, with me, recipes, it filters into those things and they're bigger issues. But going on to the topic of the stakeholder versus shareholder discussion, again with SMEs, at least in Trinidad and Tobago, a lot of people still haven't grasped that distinction or that issue. They haven't even contemplated it because we have our act again in terms of beneficial ownership being a requirement now for people to, when you have an incorporated company, an LLC, you have to have beneficial owners. So you should declare who the beneficial owners are, right? Because they're trying to tighten up with anti-money laundering and all of these things are now coming to a head. A lot of SMEs have not yet done so. They don't understand what the bigger implications are. So sometimes I find, because I kind of straddle two worlds, I may have an understanding of where it's coming from, and I would have been working in the government at the time when these things were coming up. So I may have had some foreknowledge. But a lot of SMEs are not sufficiently informed. They do not appreciate the whole, like, what is a shareholder? They're like, why? I own the company, the two of us, the husband and wife are directors, and what more you need? Is the two of us. We don't have no shares. Because you see, it's not just about giving out shares. it's also for me, I'm thinking, okay, so when you pass away, again, the legacy, who's getting these shares? If you have 5 trillion and 2 shares, how are you splitting that up? In terms of just estates, if you start going down that rabbit hole. But a lot of people don't even understand, like, what is the purpose of who's a shareholder? What is that? And then a stakeholder, good Lord, they're just trying to keep afloat. They're just trying to make ends meet, make that money. Hopefully the shop will stay open long enough so that the children could run it, or they're running it just in terms of, okay, we're running it so that we could get money to send this child to school, and then he could be a doctor and he could mine us. I mean, we have to be honest. Sometimes that whole discussion is lost on a lot of people. So I may appreciate it, we may appreciate it, but they don't really understand that, and that inward looking. And sometimes when you find, and it's been my experience, when you go into smaller companies that have become bigger, sometimes overnight, yeah, there's a major disjoint in terms of even recruitment. We talked about selecting the right people. That whole, I wrote it down here in terms of identifying the right people and having that matching up of value systems and stuff. The recruitment is all right, then you end up with all kind of employment issues. Then you have the issues going on YouTube in terms of quality control, and it goes all over the place because there was never any clarity with regard to that purpose to begin with and that direction too. So it's just something I wanted to flag that I think is a really interesting discussion, but I always smile to myself because a lot of times you talk to a small business person, they have absolutely no appreciation. They're not concerned about that. Right now, we're trying to pay the mortgage. I need to pay back the bank. We're coming to me to talk about Simone purpose. What are you talking about? So it's something that I think we have to think about how we can get people to get on board with that, because that's where we're going.
Oh, definitely agreed. Because if you really have too short-term a mindset, then how can you really develop and grow your business if you're only trying to meet your immediate and basic needs? I am so far not seeing any questions in the chat. Not sure, Kamla, I know you're always monitoring and have lots of questions yourself, so I'm not sure if you have anything that you want to ask our panel.
I do, absolutely. So what I thought was really very powerful that was shared a bit earlier, because a lot of this discussion has been so beneficial, and I'm glad we have the participants that we do listening as well. But something that was articulated, and that was when Richard Branson was asked about his legacy. And he said, don't judge him on the basis of the very many businesses he has, but rather look at what his children do. We have differences in our value systems between the generations as well. So I would love to hear from persons here who has a similar mindset as what Richard Branson shared there. And how do you go about ensuring that you instill those values because of the very challenging differences that we are seeing among the generations? Simone, it's a tough question, but I'll start with you because I know you have kids. Not too sure about Jerome and Stephen.
I was just thinking, as you said that, one of my students this semester had a very interesting experience on this same issue. So lecturing faculty of law, right? These are all law students, final year. So something we were talking about in class, and I asked one of them, he was sharing with me, he said, Ms. Whittier, my family have a business. I said, oh, that's great. Are you gonna, when you I was asking them what they're gonna do when they graduate. I said, what you gonna do? He said, well, my family has a business, and he said, and he told me what it was, and they're pretty, doing very well, and he's like the big son. I said, oh, so you're gonna qualify and go back in and help your dad run the business? He said, no, God no. I want to go into practice. I want to do criminal law. I don't have time for this. And I looked at him and said, so who's going to run the business? And it did not even seem to me, I said, he did not even contemplate. He's like, look, I doing law, I need to get out. And he was not the only one of my students. Quite a few of them, interestingly, as a gender person, a lot of the young men were like, no, we're not going back into the family business. We getting out there. We want to go and become high-flying attorneys. We want to act, we want to be on TV, this kind of thing. And it made me think about myself. I said, are either of my children interested in running this business? And the answer is no. I would have to hire somebody if I wanted to continue. So that made me now begin to question my business plan, my strategy. Does this even make sense? If I'm looking, like I said to you, my thing was one of my pieces permanence. I want a legacy, but it's something that I've come to, again, I don't know true any aspersions, but these Gen Zs and these alphas,
Yeah, no, and it's quite okay to be different. In fact, I am recalling when Alistair did his presentation for a panel earlier this week for Governance Week, and he spoke about the generations within his family, because J.A. Rowe and Sons is into their fourth generation as a family business as well. And he stated very clearly the value system did not include that the children must work in the business. And I thought that was really profound. And so his thing was, let them follow their passion. Because if you instill the right system and structures and all of that, the culture within the organization, the business will strengthen. So when we talk about our children being the ones by whom we are judged, it may not be so much in terms of whether they will continue the business, but rather this passion that we have for purpose, that we are not just profit driven, that we are concerned about social impact, that we look at, and I had a really great interview with Gail, and I think I saw Gail enter the room earlier, Gail Figaro. Awesome individual to follow on LinkedIn even. And if I recall it correctly now, she spoke about the fact that we have to see our impact on everyone else. So it's not about growing ourselves, it's about growing the entire community. How do we pass that kind of value system on to our children? I'm asking because I'm looking for an answer, because I'll tell you, I have 3 children and I vary from being absolutely in love and in awe with them to absolutely despairing sometimes as to, am I succeeding as a mother? Where did I go wrong? And, constantly trying to find that, how do we groom them into allowing them to have their own experiences, but at the same time, anchoring a value system that demonstrates that understanding and respect for others and wanting the well-being of others around them.
I think if I can just chime in, Kamala, I mean, I have 1 child, so, and at his age, I'm still not too sure which direction he's going now, early 20s, so we'll see. But you can only do so much and it is by your action, by your talking, by being there, being available, right? In terms of grooming and working with your children, and constantly, both being there, right? It's an always engaging part. But I will also come back a bit in terms of the SMEs and the business and the legacy, and think, in legislation, interestingly enough, they treat corporations as independent, as individuals, if you will. And there's clearly a reason for that. It may be that the next generation has no interest, but the entity should be designed and structured for perpetuity, right? And I think that's really is it. Can you set up the entity in such a way that the community understands it, they recognize it, there's a purpose, and it can continue into perpetuity in the absence of the generation who says, I'm not interested in managing that business. I want to run off and be an artist, and I can be a celebrity in my own right. How can you then build that? I think that becomes a key part of looking at it. So, I mean, Richard Branson is right. The entity should survive beyond him, and his children should survive beyond him, and both may have unique legacies that they end up with at the end of the day.
I love that.
If I may just say, I think something here. I think if we think in terms of,
you should tell us if you have children. Eh?
Oh yes, I do. Actually, I do. And like you all, I fear that whatever little legacy I may have will not be perpetuated, because they have minds of their own, they do their own thing. But I think at the end of the day, if we can set that purpose, I mean, the value system is there already in the family, and they're all aware of it. But we can define a purpose that allows them to address purpose, not necessarily with what you do, but with what they do as well. But it addresses the same purpose. So the guy being the artist, the guy being the musician, the guy being the superstar, athlete or whatever, at the end of the day, whatever he does, it still comes back. He still serves the purpose that was initially set. I mean, in theory, it sounds nice. I don't know. I'm trying to think as I'm talking how you can actually effect that kind of how you can make that happen. But I'm just thinking along those lines. I think it means having a mindset that does not close off things at this stage, but more keep it open, keep it infinite, and allow them to go their paths, but still be anchored on a purpose that has been set for them, for the family, for the business, and go about it in different direction.
Carmel, Novak has put a comment in the chat. Maybe you could just invite him to share it, and then Simone will come back to you.
Sorry, in terms of legacy I'm having difficulty reading. Legacy can skip a generation. If the kids don't want to be a part of the family business, the grandkids might. Seeds for future generation. Was it that one? Or I think
yeah, so I was suggesting we could ask him to unmute so he could share his thought, and then also ask Kenny as well. So they get to interact and participate if they're able to unmute. We keep an eye on it. And Novak has unmuted.
Thanks, Kamala.
30 seconds, Novak.
That was just the point there that I don't have a lot of experience in family businesses, right? But I think my grandfather had a restaurant many years ago, and his kids eventually converted that business into a hardware. But I love to cook. So, my parents and her siblings may not have been interested in running a restaurant, but, if presented with the opportunity, instead of going and running down social science PhD, I might have been a cook. So I'm just, legacy can't skip a generation. So even though the kids may not be interested, the chances are that you build the legacy, establish it for future generations to come, to have this foundation to build upon.
Yeah, that's nice.
Yeah, so Carmel, I was suggesting Kenny possibly could also unmute if he is able to. And I see Gail has put a comment in the chat. It would be okay. So and Gail is also saying she can't unmute. So we can possibly read out her comment next, right?
Okay, thanks, Kamala. Lovely discussion. Yeah. In my experience with working along with family originated businesses and small companies is that they start the business, they're busy getting the business up and running. And when it reaches a certain plateau, they just don't think about how to let this legacy continue without thinking outside of the family. And I've come across experiences where there's conflict between the family, who should run and who is capable of running. And they consume in that type of conflict, and then the business gets affected. When they could look outside the box and find competent people that could just continue the success of the business. Yeah, so I think a lot of the family-run businesses, if they don't have that open mind, it at times bring an early end to the business. That has been my experience. Yeah.
So I'm sorry, my daughter is not here because she's very fond of this quote, and I don't really remember who came up with it. So if anyone knows it really well, it's about, this guy from Saudi Arabia who spoke about his grandfather rode on a camel, and then he rode on a Rolls Royce, and then his child will ride on some other futuristic vehicle, but his great-grandchild will go back to ride on a camel. And that is because of the value systems from each generation. Yeah. So if anybody knows it, well, we can go to that. But Carmel, you can probably read the comment from Gail.
Sure. So Gail says, this is such an amazingly profound discussion. Thanks to the panelists and CCGI for facilitating it. What we can do is truly lead by example consistently and allow our children to see us charge our declarations on governance and integrity with action. Then we allow them to craft their future with that foundation. We have to be what we declare, and they will apply their version of that. As a mother of 2 young lionesses, I learned that lesson a long time ago. They truly are cut from a different but dynamic cloth, but they still look to us to guide them. And she says she can't unmute, but she hopes that the input that she has offered here has value. So thank you so much, Gail, for that. We have 10 minutes remaining in this particular session. Are there any further questions from the audience or comments? Happy to share comments as well if there are any.
Right. So I really do appreciate what Gail just shared, because it sometimes you just have to just steer the course and hope for the best because of the dynamics involved. Okay, so Amelia is saying there was a question or comment. Okay, so she's sharing. It was Sheikh Rashid was asked about the future of his country. He replied, "My grandfather rode a camel. My father rode a camel. I ride a Mercedes. My son rides a Land Rover, and my grandson is going to ride a Land Rover. But my great-grandson is going to have to ride a camel again." And I think he was capturing the cycle of what happens with the generations. And we discussed this whole issue of cycles at the opening ceremony with Professor Elkington. But I think there specifically, he spoke to the way in which we train our children by making life a little bit too easy and too comfortable, and so they don't develop the resilience to be able to deal with the tough times. And when that happens, it begins to weaken again with the generation, and you end up with the fact that, you know, you kind of start over as Amelia very kindly shared with us again. Hard times create strong men create easy times create weak men create difficult times. Many will not understand it, but you have to raise warriors, not parasites. Wow. Okay. So whatever it takes from us, I think we have to ensure that as much as we may not wake our kids at 5 a.m. to tell them they need to go and fill water by the taps and bring to the house, they still need to engage in some really tough routines that builds that mental resilience to then confront the challenges we have in the world, because the decisions they make will then be the decisions in their businesses. And all of that then has the resultant impact. Carmel, I'm going to take my exit from the room now to allow you to have your panel give their closing thoughts, and then we'll end off the discussion for today.
Okay, thank you, Kamala. So I think, you know, from all that we have heard today, it kind of goes back to the whole idea about if you don't know where you're going, you're not going to know how to get there. And so, you know, the idea of you have to have a purpose when you're setting up your business, when you're maintaining your business beyond just profit. It has to be profit for a purpose, and that purpose has to be sustainability, right? It can't just be feeding you for now. You have to look at what are the needs of your family, your community, what are your long-term goals and aspirations. And so with that, we've got last 7 minutes. So I'm going to ask each of you to please offer 2 minutes of wrap-up thoughts, and that should help us finish bang on time. So ladies first, Simone.
Oh, thank you. No, I was just saying, you know, the questions that were raised, and I asked myself, you know, how do you ensure that sustainability and legacy? And what I've decided to do is invest in community. So I think outside of, like I said in chat, bigger is more than blood. Yeah, because if you didn't have kids, who are you going to leave it to anyway? So for me, it's about investing in the wider community. Maybe not your children, but perhaps some young people that you work with. For me, it's my students. So that legacy and that value system, regardless of whether or not it's in the business itself, it perpetuates itself. And who knows? They may come back and work for you after, you don't know. But I have decided for me that I will be investing in the people that work with me. So as some young people that work with me seasonally, I invest in them. I try to guide them, kind of cultivate that value system. Other than just my kids, you know, with my students is the same thing. Because right now I'm on another board, and one of my students from 15 years ago is now on the board with me. And I'm exceedingly proud. You know, so it's more, I've realized now that I've lived long enough that it's more than just the immediate situation. You can plant men, and that could perpetuate thoughts. And, you know, it goes beyond that. The Chinese proverb, you know, you plant, what is it? You plant if you want to rule for a century, you plant men, but if you want to rule forever, you plant ideas or something like that. And it goes to me, that's what you do. You have to start planting that kind of value system and inculcating it. And like our friend said, you have to model it for them. You have to work it out. You have to show them that this is the value system. This is what we do. This is how you run a business. You may fall down, but you get back up and you keep going. And they learn from that. So for me, it's investing in not just my own immediate family, but the wider community as well. And that's why I'm trying to pursue purpose in my own business.
Thank you so much, Simone. So going again in the same order, Jerome, what are your thoughts, your closing thoughts?
Thank you, Carmel. You know, as I listen to the conversation and thing, I think that it comes right back down to remembering the why. And I think it was Simon Sinek that really pushed forward his literature and a lot of his speeches. Start with why. Remembering the why, purpose-driven. Why did we begin in the first place? Why did we see this need? Why, you know, there are many different ways of getting the solution, and the way we got it 10 years ago may not be applicable today, but you find in many industries, the why is still as relevant today as it ever is. And I'm in life insurance. There's not a difference in that reality and need. There's still a need for life insurance, you know, whether it started 200 years ago or today. But the why remains. The way in which we deliver has changed. And if we can continue to articulate that and let people understand the why, we understand the purpose, then we can see how we can move towards getting there. That's my closing thought.
Okay, thank you, Jerome. And finally, Stephen, over to you.
I really loved what Jerome wrapped up with respect to the why. You know, everybody and most organizations, it is fair to say they know what they do. It's also fair to say they know how they do it. The big question is, do they know why they do what they do? And I think that's where the link with purpose comes in. Clearly, have a clearly defined purpose. It's going to take you some time. It's you, your family, your employees, maybe your customers, or the stakeholders. Get everybody involved in defining what your purpose is. And then after that, ensure that whatever decisions you make, whatever business decisions you take, is consistent with that purpose. That's my closing remark to you today. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you too, Stephen. And once again, thanking Jerome, Simone, and everyone who has joined us this afternoon for the first session this afternoon after our keynote. I think it was a very dynamic and interesting discussion on a very, as I would have noted in my initial engagement with each of you, I thought it was a very important topic, especially given the fact that I think approximately 80% of the businesses in our region are SMEs. And so therefore, you know, it's really something that cross-cuts within our business community.